Disney's greatest love story may be based on a lie. Behind the bright colors and heartfelt songs of The Lion King lies an inexplicable inconsistency that fans have ignored for decades. What if Nala is one of the most complex and misunderstood characters in animation history? What if her accidental appearance in the jungle and her encounter with Simba were the result of a carefully thought-out plan rather than a happy coincidence? The canonical version of events that we all remember is simple. Pride Land suffers under the tyranny of Scar. Nala leaves the Pride in a desperate search for help. She accidentally meets the adult Simba in the jungle, convinces him to return and take his rightful place as king. It's a story of duty, love, and homecoming. But the more closely we analyze the sequence of events and the psychological nuances of the characters, the more inconsistent. Attentive viewers have long wondered, how could Nala have strayed so far from Pride Lands in her search for help? Why did she embark on this dangerous mission? And most importantly, why did she react the way she did when she first saw the adult Simba after so many years? The first clue to the mystery is the moment of recognition. When Nala realizes that the lion in front of her is Simba, her reaction goes beyond simple surprise. A careful analysis of the footage reveals a micro-expression of recognition rather than pure shock. This facial expression lasts only a fraction of a second, but it radically changes the context of the entire scene. Psychologists call this phenomenon primed recognition. When a person subconsciously expects or looks for a certain stimulus, their brain recognizes it much faster than in a chance encounter. Nala recognizes Simba not simply because they were childhood friends, but because she was expecting, hoping, and perhaps even purposefully looking for him. Another strange circumstance is geography. The jungle where Timon, Pumbaa, and Simba lived was incredibly far from Pride Lands, too far for their paths to cross by chance. In Disney animation, distances are often symbolic, but even in this context, the probability that Nala would accidentally wander so far and happen to meet Simba is mathematical. The official story also fails to explain why Nala went to seek help. There were many lionesses in the Pride, some older and more experienced. Why was this risk placed on young Nala? Unless, of course, the mission required her participation for some special reason. When we look at these events through the lens of the psychological concept of triangulation, when a third party is used to achieve hidden goals, a new interpretation emerges. Perhaps Nala was not just a lioness desperately seeking help. Perhaps she was a messenger with a very specific purpose. Let's take a closer look at the moment when Nala finds Simba. She is chasing Pumbaa, intending to hunt him. This is the behavior of a lioness accustomed to surviving in the harsh conditions of the Pride Lands under Scar's rule. But as soon as Simba intervenes, her behavior changes dramatically. From a predator, she instantly turns into... who? An old friend? The expression in her eyes at that moment contains not only surprise and joy at meeting an old friend. Her gaze reveals recognition of a goal, the completion of a mission. It is as if Nala has mentally checked off "Find Simba" on some internal to-do list. Upon closer examination of Nala's sequence of reactions, one can see that after her initial surprise, she moves surprisingly quickly to try to convince Simba to return. Too quickly for someone who has just accidentally discovered a childhood friend who is believed to be dead. It is as if she was already psychologically prepared for this conversation. The emotional dynamics between Nala and Simba are also thought-provoking. In the scene, "Can you feel the love tonight?" Nala displays particular persistence. Her behavior can be interpreted as something more than just a reunion with a childhood friend. There is a certain strategy in her actions. She uses their emotional connection to influence Simba's decision. So if we assume that the accidental search for help version was just a cover, the main question arises: what was Nala really looking for in the jungle? Who sent her? And most importantly, did she know that Simba was alive before she went looking for him? To answer these questions, we need to go back to the events that led to Simba's disappearance and carefully analyze Nala's position in the Pride's hierarchy under Scar's rule. In this context, each of her actions takes on a new, deeper meaning. Perhaps the great love story of Nala and Simba is much more complicated than we ever imagined. And to understand it fully, we need to explore not only what is shown on screen, but also what remains in the shadows. To understand the true nature of Nala's mission, it is necessary to analyze the position she held in Sher's Pride and the psychological environment in which her decisions were formed. Under Sher's regime, a strict hierarchy was established in the Pride. At the top was Sher himself, surrounded by hyena henchmen. The lionesses, once equal members of the community, were turned into hunters who existed only to hunt for food. However, even within this subordinate group, there was an internal structure. Sarabi, as the former queen and most experienced lioness, retained informal leadership among the females of the pride, and it was within this structure that Nala held a special position. Note Nala's positioning in scenes involving lionesses. She is almost always next to Sarabi, often slightly behind her, a position that in leadership psychology is called the heir position, or second in command. This arrangement is not accidental from the point of view of visual storytelling. Animators use spatial composition to subconsciously suggest the hierarchical relationships between characters to the viewer. Another key detail is Nala's age. By the time she leaves the pride, she is a young adult lioness, not the strongest physically, but mature enough to think strategically and young enough to be inconspicuous to the suspicious Scar. The perfect age for the role of scout or secret. In the canonical narrative, Nala explains her departure by the need to find help outside the pride's lands. This motivation seems logical at first glance. The pride lands are depleted, there is no prey, and hyenas control all the territory. However, psychological analysis reveals oddities in her behavior. In the few scenes with Nala before her departure, a special exchange of glances between her and Sarabi can be noticed. These glances contain more than just concern about the situation in the pride. They convey a silent understanding, a kind of unspoken agreement. Psychologists call this type of nonverbal communication metacommunication, the transmission of information that is only understood by those familiar with a particular A particularly telling scene is the hunting scene, where Sarabi informs Scar about the lack of food. Nala is in close proximity, and the camera briefly captures her reaction to the conversation. It is not just the reaction of a subordinate, but the look of an accomplice. This type of visual storytelling and animation is not accidental. It is used to create subtext without explaining. Now let's turn to perhaps the most important element of the backstory, the deleted scene with Sher Kha. In early versions of the Lion King script, there was a scene where Scar tries to force Nala to become his queen. This scene was cut from the final version of the film because it was too dark for a children's audience, but its existence has been confirmed by the film's creators. This deleted scene radically changes our understanding of Nala's motivation. In it, Scar directly asks Nala to become his queen, effectively making her his mate. Nala firmly refuses, after which Scar threatens to banish her. It is this refusal and the subsequent threat that cause Nala to flee the pride, not simply in search of help, but to save herself from a forced union with a tyrant. But the most interesting thing about this scene is not Nala's refusal itself, but how it is presented. Nala refuses Scar not out of personal animosity, which would be natural, but by referring to pride traditions, a phrase that reveals the influence of Sarabi, the guardian of these traditions. This indicates that Nala was not acting on her own initiative, but within the framework of a code of conduct, possibly agreed upon with Sarabi in advance. Nala's psychological profile during this period shows signs of dual loyalty, a state in which a person is forced to demonstrate loyalty to an authoritative figure while maintaining inner loyalty to another value system. While outwardly obeying Scar's regime, she remained deeply committed to the ideals embodied by Sarabi and the memory of Mufasa. Another aspect that is often overlooked is the collective trauma of the pride after the loss of Mufasa and the presumed death of Simba. Psychological research shows that traumatized communities often form a mythology of hope, unofficial, sometimes secret narratives that help them maintain faith in a better future. In the context of the pride, this mythology could have been the belief that Simba was alive and would one day return. Even more interesting is Sarabi's stance on Simba's death. In the film, we don't see her immediate reaction to the news of her son's death. When we first meet her in the adult timeline, she has already accepted this loss, at least outwardly. But acceptance does not mean belief. Maternal intuition is a powerful psychological phenomenon, and Sarabi, as her actions and decisions show, was an exceptionally intuitive lioness. All of this leads us to a provocative but psychologically plausible suggestion. What if Sarabi never fully believed that Simba was dead? What if she at least allowed for the possibility that her son was alive? In that case, sending Nala to seek help takes on a whole new meaning. Nala's departure from the pride can thus be interpreted not simply as a desperate attempt to find help, but as a carefully planned mission, a mission whose goal was precisely to find Simba. Nala's refusal to become Scar's queen was not only a personal choice, but also part of this plan. a reason to leave the pride's territory with the approval of the tyrant himself, who otherwise might have suspected a conspiracy. This theory is consistent with Nala's subsequent behavior in the jungle. How purposefully she explored the territory, how quickly she adapted to the role of a hunter away from the pride, and, most importantly, how she instantly switched from hunting to fulfilling her true mission when she realized she had found Simba. Now that we have established the psychological and social context of Nala's departure, it is time to analyze the key moment, the meeting with Simba itself, and how her behavior in this scene reveals her true intention. The most critical moment for understanding Nala's true motives is the scene where she meets Simba in the jungle. It is here, in the minutiae of the animation, in the micro-expressions and unconscious gestures, that the key to the mystery lies. Let's start with the circumstances of the encounter. Nala is hunting Pumbaa. This is natural behavior for a hungry lioness. However, the strangeness lies in the very fact that she is hunting alone, far from the pride. Lionesses are collective hunters, especially when it comes to large prey. Hunting alone is a risk that lionesses usually avoid. This behavior can be interpreted in two ways. Either Nala was so desperate that she risked hunting alone, or the hunt was just a cover for her true purpose. Let's analyze the chronology of events from a psychological point of view. Nala spots Pumbaa and begins to chase him. Simba stands up for his friend and attacks Nala. A short fight ensues, during which Nala uses a specific technique. She flips her opponent onto his back. It is this technique that becomes the moment of recognition for both. Here it is important to pay attention to the smallest nuances of the animation. When Simba finds himself upside down and utters the famous phrase, Nala, her expression changes not just from surprise to recognition. For a split second, a whole range of emotions can be seen on her face. First disbelief, then verification, as she studies his features. Then, and this is the key moment, a brief expression of confirmation, and only then joy. This sequence of micro-expressions corresponds to the psychological model of hypothesis confirmation, rather than a random discovery. If Nala really believed Simba was dead, her first reaction would have been shock, disbelief, perhaps even fear, encountering a supposedly dead creature. However, her reaction is more reminiscent of what psychologists call recognition of the expected, when the subject is subconsciously prepared for the encounter. Nala's subsequent reaction is even more telling. After her initial surprise and joy, she demonstrates a remarkably quick adaptation to the situation. She does not ask questions about how he survived or what he did all these years. Questions that would be natural in a chance encounter with someone believed to be dead. Instead, she almost immediately moves on to the topic of returning to the pride, telling him about the situation there, and this quick shift in focus from "how did you survive" to "you need to come back" indicates that Nala is already psychologically prepared for this conversation. This readiness becomes even more apparent in the "Can you feel the love tonight" scene, where she actively uses emotional connection to influence Simba's decision. The visual elements of this scene are also worth analyzing. In it, Nala takes the initiative in the interaction, leads Simba to the waterfall, and creates situations for rapprochement. In terms of body language, she demonstrates not so much passive acceptance of the situation as active construction of an emotional context, behavior characteristic of someone who is following a specific strategy. Particularly noteworthy is the scene where Nala first tries to convince Simba to return. A careful analysis of her argument shows that she appeals not to the general idea of "we need help," but specifically to Simba's royal responsibility, his duty to the pride. This is a purposeful persuasion strategy based on knowledge of his personality and vulnerabilities. When Simba refuses, Nala's reaction is particularly telling. She shows not just disappointment, but deep frustration, as if his refusal disrupts some plan she was supposed to carry out. The phrase, "you're not the Simba I remember," is not just an emotional rebuke, it is an attempt at manipulation through an appeal to identity. Moving further in our analysis, we cannot fail to note Nala's reaction to Simba's explanation of his life according to the principle of Hakuna Matata. Her bewilderment and even a certain contempt for this philosophy indicate that for her, Simba's return was not only a matter of personal happiness, but also of fulfilling a duty, a mission entrusted to her. It is also noteworthy how quickly Nala adapted to the jungle, a territory completely unfamiliar to a lioness from the savannah. She demonstrates hunting and survival skills far from the pride, which indicates probable preparation for a long journey. This is not the behavior of a lioness who impulsively fled from danger, but the actions of someone who is preparing for a mission. But the most intriguing evidence is the geographical factor. Even allowing for the conventions of animation, the jungle where Simba lived was a considerable distance from the Pride Lands. To get there, Nala had to cross a desert, mountains, and other obstacles, a journey that can hardly be called accidental. Such a journey requires a specific direction and purpose. In this context, a logical question arises. How did Nala know which direction to look for Simba? The answer may lie in the collective memory of the Pride. It is important to remember that the film does not show the moment when Scar announces Simba's death. We only see his speech to all the animals of the savannah. Given Scar's manipulative nature, it is quite possible that his story about how Simba died contained inconsistencies that could have planted doubts in the minds of the most perceptive members of the Pride. Moreover, there is a small but significant moment in the animation. When Simba runs through the desert after his supposed death, he is seen for a moment by a figure in the distance, a silhouette resembling Rafiki. If Rafiki saw Simba alive, it is possible that he shared this information with someone in the Pride, perhaps Sarabi, who in turn could have let Nala in on the secret. Another important detail is Nala's behavior upon returning to the Pride with Simba. She does not seem surprised by the reaction of the other lionesses, or by how quickly they accept Simba as their leader. This smooth integration makes it seem as if the Pride was psychologically prepared for the return of the rightful heir. All these elements come together to form a single picture. Nala was purposefully searching for Simba, and her chance encounter with him in the jungle was the culmination of that search, not just a happy coincidence. But if this is the case, an even deeper question arises. Who sent Nala on this mission? And why was she chosen to carry out this task? The answers to these questions lead us to the heart of the Pride's political dynamics, and to a figure whose influence may have been decisive in organizing this secret mission. If we accept the theory that Nala was deliberately searching for Simba, we must ask ourselves, who was behind this plan? There could only be one lioness who was the logical center of this conspiracy. Sarabi, Simba's mother, and former queen of the Pride. Sarabi's position under Scar's regime is unique from a psychological point of view. She has suffered a triple trauma: the loss of her husband, the presumed loss of her son, and her fall from the position of queen to that of an ordinary hunter. Nevertheless, in the scenes in which she appears, we do not see a mother broken by grief, but a lioness with an inner strength and informal authority among. It is particularly important to analyze the scene where Sarabi confronts Shere Khan over a lack of food. She does not act as a pleading subordinate, but as an equal, directly pointing out Shere Khan's inability to lead the Pride. This boldness goes beyond simple discontent. It is the behavior of someone who has a careful analysis of Sarabi's body language in this scene reveals that she is not afraid of Shere Khan. Her posture, direct gaze, and tone of voice all speak of an inner confidence that seems out of place for someone who has completely resigned herself to the tyrant's regime. Psychologically, this behavior corresponds to a state that experts call strategic confidence. When a person behaves confidently, not because of their current position of power, but because of their knowledge of. But the main psychological clue is Sarabi's reaction to Simba's return. The moment she first sees her adult son, her face reflects a sequence of emotions: shock, recognition, and then, critically, not so much surprise as relief. This is not the reaction of someone who has seen someone rise from the dead, but of someone whose suspicions or hopes. It is also noteworthy how quickly Sarabi accepts Simba's return as a given. There are no long questions about how he survived or where he has been all these years, only instant acceptance of him as the rightful heir to the throne. Such a reaction is more consistent with the confirmation of a long-held hypothesis than with encountering a miracle. This hypothesis also explains other seemingly unrelated details of the film. For example, the fact that Scar did not completely destroy Mufasa's old guard. Sarabi and the other lionesses were not banished or eliminated, despite their obvious loyalty to the former king. This decision, illogical from the point of view of a tyrant, can be explained either by a sentimentality uncharacteristic of Scar, which is unlikely, or by his underestimation of the potential for resistance, especially from mere females. The key to understanding Sarabi's secret strategy may lie in the concept of a matriarchal underground. In conditions of open patriarchal domination, female communities often form hidden structures of influence and resistance based on informal connections and communication inaccessible to the dominant group. In the context of Shere's pride, such a structure could have been the behavior of the other lionesses also supports this theory. Notice how quickly and organized they react to Simba's return and the subsequent confrontation with Shere Khan. There is no chaos or panic, just coordinated action by a group that may have been waiting for the right moment for a long time. But why was Nala chosen for the mission to find Simba? The answer lies in the intersection of personal and political factors. First, Nala was Simba's best friend from childhood, which gave her the unique ability to recognize him even after many years of separation. The conspirators could not ignore this advantage. Second, Nala's age. She was young enough not to arouse Scar's suspicion as a potential threat, but mature enough to handle a dangerous mission away from the Pride. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the psychological connection between Nala and Simba. Sarabi, as a wise lioness, could understand that even if Nala found Simba, a simple message about the plight of the Pride might not be enough to bring him back. An emotional trigger was needed to overcome his fear and guilt, and that trigger. In this context, the deleted scene where Scar tries to make Nala his queen takes on new meaning. Perhaps it was not just a coincidence, but a moment that Sarabi and Nala used as a catalyst to launch their plan. Nala's refusal and Sher's subsequent threat created the perfect excuse for her to leave the Pride without arousing suspicion. There is other, more subtle evidence to support the theory of Sarabi's secret plan. Note the positioning of the characters in key scenes. When Scar announces his ascension to the throne, Sarabi is at the center of the group of lionesses, visually signifying her leadership position even at the moment of losing power. When Simba returns and confronts Scar, she deliberately yields the central position to her son. The scene after Scar confesses to Mufasa's murder is particularly telling. When the final battle begins, the lionesses attack the hyenas with remarkable coordination, suggesting that they were prepared for this turn of events. Their actions do not appear to be a spontaneous reaction to the revelation, but rather the realization of a long-planned rebellion. Another aspect worthy of attention is Sarabi's reaction to Sher's confession of Mufasa's murder. Her shock and rage are authentic, but they lack any element of surprise at Sher's baseness. She always suspected him of the worst. She just didn't know the specific details. This reflects Sarabi's general psychological attitude. If we accept the theory that Sarabi never fully believed in Simba's death and organized a search for him through Nala, this puts the story of the Lion King in a completely new context. Instead of a simple story about growing up and accepting responsibility, we get a complex political narrative where female characters play a much more active and strategic role than it seemed at first glance. In this interpretation, Nala emerges not just as a symbol of love and reunion, but as a key agent of change whose actions were part of a carefully thought-out plan to restore the rightful power to the Pride. And her chance encounter with Simba in the jungle turns out to be the final act of this plan. This interpretation not only enriches Nala's character, but also transforms our assessment of the events that followed this meeting. In particular, Simba's refusal to return and the subsequent conflict between him and Nala. Accepting the theory that Nala was deliberately searching for Simba on Sarabi's behalf radically changes our perception not only of the characters in The Lion King, but also of key scenes in the film, especially those involving Simba and Nala. First of all, the conflict between Simba and Nala after their reunion needs to be reevaluated. In the traditional interpretation, Simba's refusal to return is perceived as a sign of his immaturity and unwillingness to accept responsibility. Nala, on the other hand, appears as the voice of reason and duty, who accidentally stumbles upon her. However, through the lens of our theory, this scene takes on a completely different psychological dimension. Simba's refusal is not just a personal choice. It is the disruption of a plan that Nala may have spent weeks or months working on. Her disappointment and anger at this moment go beyond simple frustration. It is a reaction to the collapse of a strategy that was the Pride's only hope. Nala's phrase, "You're not the Simba I remember," is particularly telling. In the context of our theory, this is not just an emotional rebuke, but a professional assessment. The mission is in jeopardy because the target has changed more than was anticipated in the original plan. Simba's reaction also takes on a new context. His harshness and aggression in response to Nala's persistence are not just a defense of his carefree lifestyle, but a subconscious resistance to manipulation. On a deeper level, Simba may feel that Nala has come not just as a friend, but with a specific purpose, and this triggers the "Can you feel the love tonight" scene also takes on new meaning. Traditionally, this is seen as an idyllic moment of reunion and awakening feelings. However, if Nala was indeed on a mission to bring Simba back, it raises questions about the spontaneity of her emotional outbursts. This does not mean that Nala's feelings were insincere. Psychologically, it is entirely possible to experience genuine emotions while pursuing a strategic goal. Her attachment to Simba may have been one of the reasons why she was chosen for this mission. Sarabi may have counted on the emotional bond between them to be a key factor in this context. The moment when Simba finally decides to return, after meeting Rafiki, takes on special significance. This is not just a personal epiphany for the hero, it is the actual completion of Nala's mission. Even if she herself was not present when the decision was made, her work to activate the heir to the throne was done. It is noteworthy that after this turning point, Nala's role in the narrative changes significantly. From an active agent, she becomes a supporting character. When Simba returns to the Pride and confronts Scar, Nala is nearby, but no longer at the forefront of events. This is logical from the point of view of her mission. Her main task has been accomplished, and she now returns to her usual role in the Pride's hierarchy. The analysis of the final battle is particularly interesting. When the confrontation begins, Nala leads the lionesses in an attack on the hyenas, an action that requires leadership qualities and group coordination skills. This behavior is consistent with an experienced operative who has completed a difficult mission and is ready for the final phase of the plan, rather than a childhood friend who has returned. It is also worth noting that after defeating Scar and restoring Simba as king, Nala assumes the role of queen without any apparent hesitation or period of adjustment. This readiness may indicate that this role was part of her long-term expectations, perhaps even part of Sarabi's plan. This theory also sheds new light on Sarabi's character, significantly enriching her psychological depth. From a passive figure mourning the loss of her son and husband, she transforms into a master strategist and organizer of a secret resistance that not only survived Scar's regime but ultimately succeeded in. This interpretation also explains why Sarabi voluntarily takes a back seat in the final scenes of the film. Her mission is accomplished, and power has been handed over to a new generation. This is not defeat or removal, it is the conscious completion of a strategic. But perhaps the most significant change concerns our understanding of Nala's character. In the traditional interpretation, she appears as a relatively simple character, a loyal friend, a lover, a symbol of hope. Through the prism of our theory, she becomes a complex protagonist with her own mission and in this interpretation, Nala is not just the hero's girlfriend, but a skilled agent operating in extreme conditions, capable of independent decision-making and adaptation to changing circumstances. Her position in the finale is not simply a reward for loyalty, but a well-deserved status as co-leader, earned through her strategic contribution to the restoration of the Pride. This theory also adds a new dimension to the relationship between Simba and Nala. Their love story ceases to be a simple reunion of childhood friends and becomes a complex psychological interaction where personal feelings are intertwined with duty, strategy, and politics. This does not devalue their love but makes it more mature and multifaceted. Considering all of the above, The Lion King emerges as a much more complex narrative than it first appears. Beneath the simple story of growing up and accepting responsibility lies a subtle political narrative about power, strategy, and resistance, where key female characters play a much more active role than is commonly believed. The theory that Nala was deliberately searching for Simba also forces us to take a fresh look at the themes of fate and chance in the film. Events that seemed like random coincidences appear to be the result of human, or in this case lion, planning, will, and strategy. This makes the narrative no less but more profound, emphasizing the importance of active action and strategic thinking in the face of tyranny. In conclusion, it is worth noting that this theory, although not officially confirmed by the creators of the film, has solid psychological and narrative grounds. It corresponds to the character's behavior, the logic of the plot, and the subtle visual cues scattered. Perhaps it is this ambiguity and multi-layered nature that make The Lion King such an outstanding work that continues to resonate with audiences decades after its release. A film that can be interpreted on multiple levels, from a simple coming-of-age story to a complex political drama, it demonstrates remarkable depth for an animated project originally aimed at. At the center of this complexity is Nala, a character who may seem minor at first glance but, upon closer inspection, turns out to be one of the key drivers of the plot, perhaps even more strategically important than Simba himself. In this context, Nala's great lie, her pretense of being a lioness who accidentally wandered into the jungle, becomes not a deception, but an act of supreme loyalty to her pride, to the rightful heir to the throne, and to her mentor Sarabi. This devotion, expressed through a flawlessly executed secret mission, makes Nala one of the most impressive female characters in the Disney animated canon, deserving of much more recognition than she has received so far.